Hello again and welcome to another installment of It Came From The Collection, where I use a random number generator to decide which movie from my collection I'm going to watch. And today's movie is none other than Dredd.
So this movie came out in 2012, and I gotta say, it got a bit of a bum deal upon its initial release.
When this came out, I just assumed it would be terrible, like most people I knew at the time. Probably because my only exposure to this character up until this movie was the Judge Dredd movie from '95 starring Sylvester Stallone, which is a fun, bad movie, but it's still a bad movie. I mean, I didn't know anything about this character. I didn't know he originated from the UK. I always just assumed he was an American character for some reason. Bear in mind as well, this is the same year that The Dark Knight Rises came out, and if you compare the posters to one another, even that I assumed, it's just a cheap cash grab. Boy, was I wrong.
This is actually a fantastic action movie, and it's extremely underrated in my opinion. It starts out setting up that it takes place in a post-apocalyptic future in a place called Mega City 1. So crime has gotten so bad that the police forces had to evolve accordingly in order to deal with it. So you have these people who decide the fate of criminals on the spot, or, as the movie puts it,
juries. Executioners, judges,
which is just badass. We immediately go from that into a chase scene between our main character Dredd, played by Karl Urban, and some criminals, so we get more of a feel for his character and the world around him.
Which is both kind of new and somewhat familiar. I mean, a lot of people cite Blade Runner as an influence, but I say this feels a lot like The Fifth Element and RoboCop just kind of mixed together, which, to be fair, seems pretty faithful to the comics.
It's also in this first chase sequence where we get our initial introduction to this drug simply known as slow-mo. Now, what this drug does is it makes the world appear brighter and slows down your perception of time. This kind of leads me to mention that this movie was really pushed as a 3D-centric movie when released. And even though usually I'm not really into 3D movies, I just kind of see them more as gimmicky than necessary, I really, really wish I would have seen this in 3D in theaters just for these slow-mo scenes alone. I think a major difference here is that this was actually filmed in 3D as opposed to converted to 3D, which a lot of the movies coming out around the same time were. Fortunately, the Blu-ray I have here, and most if not all Blu-ray releases of this guy, come with the ability to watch it in 3D, but it's not solely a 3D Blu-ray, so you can watch it on the regular as well. But anyway, back to the movie. So after we see how Dredd handles these initial criminals, he returns to the main headquarters, the Hall of Justice.
Like, that's just cool.
It's here that we're introduced to the character of Anderson, who's played by Olivia Thirlby, who we're told has gone through the academy to be a judge, but so far has just been what they refer to as borderline. So she's not failing spectacularly, but she's not passing either. They decide to pair her with Dredd as like a kind of test, since it's revealed that she's also a very powerful psychic. So even though she's testing low in the academy, she could be a very powerful and useful judge. As a part of her tests, Dredd allows her to choose what their next move is, and she decides to respond to a call from a mega block called Peachtree, and this is where the rest of the movie takes place. This simple call ends up escalating, getting really out of hand, and Dredd and Anderson end up fighting their way up the tower through just a vicious gang war.
And I'll leave it at that. I mean, I don't want to spoil too much, as I highly recommend you check this out on your own. But the last thing I will talk about is the villain of this movie, who, from what I can tell, is original to the movie and not from the comics. And it's a character called Mama.
The villain here is extremely awesome. We're told that she apparently started off as a prostitute, but after she was attacked by a pimp, she gets revenge on this guy and then decides to start her own gang, which is just ruthless. I mean, her trademark is apparently violence. Her gang ends up spreading and taking over this entire block, so she essentially just owns this whole district out of fear and violence. She's played by Lena Headey, who most people at this point probably know from Game of Thrones, and she plays this character very well. I mean, she doesn't need to say much, and she just comes off super intimidating. She also has this very punk rock vibe about her.
I mean, that's kind of the type of movie it is. I find it doesn't bombard you with backstory. I mean, it lays out the information you need, but it doesn't, like, choke you with exposition. It just leaves you wanting more.
Thankfully, the Blu-ray comes with just a ton of featurettes, including one called Mega City Masters 35 Years of Judge Dredd, which is just a breakdown of like the origins of the character and the history of the comic he's from, and I just found it super interesting and worth checking out all on its own. Unfortunately, I couldn't capture the menu for some reason, so here it is, looking pretty cool.
So it's unfortunate that this didn't do as well as I think it deserved to do. I mean, most people's complaints seem to be like it takes place in one location and is just full of tropes from the action movie genre, but I think that's also kind of the fun of it. I mean, just speaking from a quality perspective, the sequels that could have rolled out of this would have been excellent. Like, just bear in mind, this was supposed to be a completely different movie. They wanted Judge Death to be the villain, and this is an undead judge that thinks that all life is a crime because only the living commit crimes. That sounds crazy, but a bit much to start out with. So they decided to do more of like a day in the life of Dredd, which is what this turned out to be, but they wanted to build up to the Judge Death storyline, which sounds awesome. But because the movie didn't do so well, it's not happening from the sounds of it. The only thing I've heard is that there's a possibility of doing like a TV series that just focuses more on just day-to-day crimes in Mega City 1, and Dredd would just be kind of like a side character that shows up every now and again, which I'd still watch that. But I haven't heard any movement on that in a few years. So here's hoping that it does happen, but so far I've heard nothing. But anyway, if you're in the mood for post-apocalyptic sci-fi action, check this out.
I am the law.